Hi again and welcome back to my channel. It's going to be a bit of a chatty video today, I think, and this is kind of coming off the back of yesterday's video. So first of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who said such lovely things about yesterday's video, which was a singing video. I know that a lot of you were hoping that I would be doing some kind of musical stuff on the 30 by 30 series, so hooray for that. But as always kind of happens when I share this side of myself, I do get a lot of questions regarding kind of my background and that type of thing. And what some of you who are new to the channel may not be aware of is that I used to be a professional musical theatre performer for quite some years, but that is not something that I do anymore. The main thing that happens when people find out that you used to be a performer or an actor and you no longer do it, the first thing that they want to know is why. Why don't you act anymore? What happened? What changed that you no longer want to pursue that as a career? So I thought this would be a really interesting opportunity to talk about that in a little bit more detail. What I should really kind of preface this video with before we get into all of the real nitty-gritty of what I'm going to talk about is this is entirely my opinion based on my personal experience. I am not the be-all and end-all of knowledge when it comes to working in theatre. Different people have different experiences. So this is literally just my opinions based on personal experience. So there will be a lot of people who probably have had very different experiences than myself whilst working as performers. So that being said, bear that in mind and let's kind of have a little chat. I think I had the performing need within me from a very, very young age. I was the type of child who, if at a pantomime they needed volunteers from the audience, I would be out of my chair in a shot just to have the opportunity to be on stage with the actors. At school, all I could think about was being in the next school play. I used to go to weekend drama classes. By the time I was in senior school, I was taking part in multiple amateur dramatics groups and shows per year. I was doing 3 dance lessons at least a week. I was learning at one point 3 separate musical instruments at one point. I was having singing lessons. It's been kind of my dream to be a musical theatre performer for as long as I can remember. It was mostly started when I was taken to a performance of Phantom of the Opera at Her Majesty's Theatre in London when I was 7 years old, and from that moment onwards I just knew that that's what I wanted to be. That was the goal. I don't think I'd ever seen anything more magical and wonderful, and I was captivated by it. I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. There was never really anything else for me. I was very lucky that I had a very supportive family who came to see pretty much every show that I ever did. My parents in particular have always been incredibly supportive of me being a performer, and I was committed 100%. There was a time when every single scrap of spare time that I had was dedicated to some form of performance or other. So it really didn't surprise many people when I ended up getting into my drama school of choice. While I was at college studying for my degree, I was more committed to that than I've ever really been to anything in my life, I think. I didn't used to socialise. It was a degree, but it wasn't the same as being at university. I would get up and be in college for 8:30 doing body fitness and ballet bar, and then we would be working solidly throughout the day until around about 6 o'clock in the evening. We would often have additional rehearsals after that time. We would have additional voice lessons outside of that time. It was very full on, which to be honest is to prepare you for what it's like to be a performer, because it's something that you have to commit yourself to 100% in order to be really successful. I loved being at college and finally being immersed in the world that I had longed for such a long time. And I was one of the lucky ones that after 3rd year I signed with a very lovely agent who automatically started putting me up for auditions. Auditions are probably one of the hardest things that you'll ever have to do as a performer. I think that's really a universal truth for a lot of people. It can be very nerve-wracking. There was a point after my graduation where I auditioned for pretty much every single show in the West End and was turned down for every single one after the next, after the next, after the next. And at this point I was still in and out of London quite regularly, and I remember going down the tubes, so the escalators on the tube, and they tend to have show posters for different West End shows as you go down, and I was kind of ticking them off as I went down. Didn't get into this one, didn't get into that one, didn't get into this one. It was pretty kind of darkly funny, I guess, but it's something that a lot of new performers go through, that initial battle to actually get cast in something. I did quite a few small jobs before my first kind of big West End job. I did some profit share stuff, I did small productions, I did pantomime, and then I was lucky enough to, within the first year of being outside of college, get my first West End show, which was amazing. My entire career, I look back on it and I think of it very fondly in a lot of ways. I was incredibly lucky. I don't think I quite realised how lucky I was doing the type of jobs that I did. I travelled to some pretty incredible places. Working in musical theatre took me to New York, it took me to different places in Europe, it took me all over the UK, and for that I will forever be grateful that I got the opportunity to do that. I also got to perform amongst some incredible people and work on some pieces that are very near and dear to my heart. It was a really, really wonderful time of my life in so many ways. However much I look back on that point of my life with rose-tinted glasses, there were a lot of demons, shall we say, lurking in the shadows of my brain around those kind of times. And it's those dark things that really were the reason that I stopped. Working as a performer is really hard, bottom line. I'm sure anybody who works in a creative industry will empathise with just how hard it is to succeed in an industry that is so oversaturated with people going into it. Every time I would go to an audition, there would be so many new people fresh out of college who were fitter than I was, who were younger than I was, who may not necessarily have the CV that I have, but the majority of jobs that you go for, it's based on what you do on the day as opposed to what you've done before. Granted, your CV will probably get you a foot in the door with certain casting directors and that type of thing, but it's all down to what you can show on a particular day. At least that was how it felt in my own experience. On top of the fact that it's so competitive and driven and just a lot of demand on you as a person, there is a constant scrutiny that is very difficult to deal with. I wouldn't say that you are encouraged to be just thin and beautiful and generic, because there is a casting available for every type of person in theatre, but the more specific that you are in terms of the way that you look and the type of person that you present to the world, the more unique you are in yourself, the more narrow your opportunities are when it comes to being cast in things. I remember quite distinctly the day that I realised that I was never going to be considered as a leading lady by any casting director because of the way that I look, because I do not come across as that type of person, no matter how much I may be able to play that role, or I may have the abilities to play that role. People look at me, they see the type of person that I am, and they automatically think the funny best friend character or the comedy character. It was that constant analysis of myself and thinking about how the way that I looked, the way that I spoke, the way that I came across could literally limit whether or not I got a job or not. That was one of the first things that kind of made me start thinking that perhaps this was a little bit too much for me. That sense of self-assessment and micro-analysis has never left me. It's one of the reasons why I am so particular about everything when it comes to podcast production elements, when it comes to my creativity. I find it very difficult to let go and let things just be chill, because I've had it built into me that control is important, analysis is important. That can be quite destructive, particularly when it comes to assessing yourself in things that you really can't change. For example, when I was auditioning for one particular role, I distinctly remember being told that I didn't get a job because I was too old and because I was too tall. I had done multiple rounds of auditions for this job, and I'd been the same height throughout, and I couldn't understand why my height was such an issue after 6 rounds of auditions when I hadn't grown. To be told that you're too old for something when you're around about 25 years old, that's when you realise that things are a little bit problematic. And both of those assessments are relatively fair, because it's not necessarily something that's personally about you when you receive this kind of feedback. It's about how you fit into a company. So it may have been that the guy that I was going to be playing against would have been shorter than me, which a lot of people don't think is okay when it comes to casting, and it may have been that the age that I present was coming across as older than a lot of other people that had also been cast in that show. But I can look back on that and see that that makes sense, but in the moment it just made me feel like there's so many things outside of my control that I'm beating myself up about. One other big part of not wanting to perform anymore was an experience that's very personal to myself, and this was probably not the case for so many people who go out into performance. And to be perfectly honest, it may be something that's experienced in any aspect of the working world, regardless of whether it's in theatre or on an office or on a boat somewhere, I don't know. But I had several really quite disturbing run-ins with people that I was working with that were, shall we say, not very kind. I don't really know what their problem was, these particular individuals. Maybe they were just hungry, because they were the type of people who probably didn't eat enough in order to look the way that they did. I get it's hard. Like I said, I understand it's hard. I experienced it myself. Working in performance is hard work. But as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't give you free rein to be cruel to people for pretty much no reason. I experienced quite a lot of that in various jobs. Maybe it was just something about me, maybe I attract that kind of thing, but it gets to a point where you just think, this isn't really worth my time. And I think that's really where the turning point was for me. I think of theatre as a performer as simultaneously being the best and worst job in the world. You can't beat the feeling of being on stage, of having people applaud you, of feeling that love, that passion from the audience, from the people around you on stage. It really is magic. Some of the happiest times of my life have been during performances, and it really is another world. It's incredible. However, I can say it's also been one of the most destructive elements of my life in terms of completely stripping me of any sense of self-esteem. And it took me away from my friends, from my family. You work opposite hours to pretty much everybody that you know who works 9 to 5, because obviously theatre is pretty much working nights constantly. If you're on tour, you live out of a suitcase. For the better part of 2 years of my relationship with Emrys, we were pretty much doing long distance, which was hard, especially because that was towards the beginning of our relationship. And it eventually got to the point where I said, are the positives still outweighing the negatives of this hard job? And for me, they really weren't anymore. I will always be thankful for the opportunities that I was given through working as a performer. I've had some life experiences that some people will just never get, but it was very much the right decision for me to stop. I've never regretted it a single second, and I genuinely felt more free and happier on the day that I decided to leave my agent and stop going to auditions and stop pursuing an acting career than I had done in years of working as a performer. Will I ever do it again? I'm one of those people who says never say never. It may be something that I go back to later in life, but I can't really imagine myself going back at this point, if I'm perfectly honest. It doesn't mean that I'll never perform again. It doesn't stop me loving theatre. But that chapter of my life has come to an end now. And it's time to move on to the next one. If this whole experience has taught me anything, it's just to take your happiness where you find it. Because sometimes it's not going to be the big dream that brings you that happiness. It could be the smallest thing, but that doesn't make it any less valid. Yeah? Thanks for listening, guys, to my rambly video, and I will see you soon. Bye.